go to the exact agenda for the day. And so I think I have given you all the this passage, right? The acquired characteristics. And hopefully you guys have solved it. I know for a fact that a few of you have already attempted it. The questions are also correct. I just want to give you a simple briefing before I start with this session, and I'll allow people as in they come. This is obviously a CAT 2018 slot 1. Just giving a little bit of disclaimer for the ones who are unaware of the session. Okay, so this is going to be a reading comprehension live session. And is there anything unusual about this particular passage that I gave? Not really. This was a fairly decent passage, a good passage. It would have taken you somewhat 10 minutes to, solve it entirely, which is fine going by the standards of CAT 2018. Now, before I start with the explanation, I would just like to give you an anecdote. The first bit anecdote is that, okay, let me check once if I have muted everybody because somebody popping in, and yeah, so I think everything is perfect. And yeah, so the thing that I was telling you all, that compare this with CAT 2019 and you will realize that the level of difficulty drastically increases. So comparative analysis tells us that, for CAT 2018, at least for this particular slot 1, all of the reading comprehension passages were fairly readable. Questions were also very, I would say, moderate, easy question, not very difficult. So let's read this one. I'm very happy that almost all of you got most of the questions correct, but let's read it any which ways. So let's start up with the first para. When researchers at Emory University in Atlanta trained mice to fear the smell of almonds by pairing it with electric shock, they found, to their consternation, that both the children and the grandchildren of these mice were spontaneously afraid of the same smell. Now, if you would just realize that this is the finding of that experiment, you can call it an experiment or a research, this thing, which happened in Emory University in Atlanta. And this is really important because when something like this, so this is a factual passage, when something like this gets introduced, you know for a fact that this is the pivot around which the entire story is going to revolve. Nevertheless, let's read ahead. This is not supposed to happen. This is not supposed to happen. Generations of school children have been taught that the inheritance of acquired characteristics is impossible. A mouse should not be born with something its parents have learned during their lifetimes, any more than a mouse that loses its tail in an accident should give birth to a tailless mice. Now, obviously, I don't really think I need to explain this thing, pretty self explanatory. So let's just jump into this one. Modern evolutionary biology dates back to a synthesis that emerged in the 1940s, 60s, which married Charles Darwin's mechanism of natural selection with the Gregor Mendel's discovery. Now, this is a very interesting word that these guys are using. Just a second. So what they're saying is they married Charles Darwin's mechanism of natural selection to that of Gregor Mendel's discovery of how genes are inherited. So if in one line, if you could just tell me that what exactly did this Darwin fellow did, obviously we know what this fellow is, Charles Darwin's. He basically talked about natural selection, and the Mendel basically discovered, or his discoveries of how genes are inherited. This is very important because you, in a flow, there are certain things that you can remember. Obviously, comprehension does not mean memory. Comprehension basically means what tidbit information can you capture while reading it. Okay, obviously we're reading it for a purpose, for solving questions. So these tidbit informations will definitely help you. Let's read ahead. The traditional and dominant view is that adaptations adaptations from human brain to the peacock's tail are fully and satisfactorily, fully and satisfactory, again an interesting word, explained by natural selection and subsequent inheritance. Yet, new evidence from genomics, epigenetics, and developmental biology indicates that evolution is more complex than once assumed. In his book on human nature, 1978, the evolutionary biologist, pay attention, Edward O. Wilson. Now, whenever I say pay attention, please pay attention because the name is introduced. I keep on saying this again and again that whenever there is a name that gets introduced in a passage, there is an argument that the person will invoke into the passage, and his argument is very important. You know, whether the author flies tandem with this Edward O. Wilson's argument or not, that is important for us to understand, or maybe draw a pivot around it, which our inferences will be built on. So what did he said? The metaphor needs revision. What metaphor? That this person claimed that human culture is held on a genetic leash. Human culture is held on a genetic leash. We know what human culture is. We know what leash. We know what a leash is. कुत्ते का पट्टा, कुत्ते के गले का पट्टा is called leash. The metaphor needs revision. Imagine a dog walker. The genes important. Okay, please pay attention. I know, I mean, most of you guys have already solved the passage, so I don't really need to underline so heavily, but just in case somebody who is maybe watching this video very in a nascent stage, the dog walker, you know comparing, or maybe metaphorically speaking, the dog walker, the genes, comparing him with genes, struggling to retain control of a brawny mastiff. Human culture. Do we know what brawny mastiff is? A muscular dog. Basically, the metaphor for human culture is used as a brawny mastiff. The pair's trajectory, the pathway of evolution, reflects the outcome of the struggle. Now, please understand, at this point, I am pretty sure you have understood what they are trying to tell you. Ki genes basically are trying to hold on to this human culture as much as a dog walker tries to hold on to a brownie mastiff or a muscular dog, and the path and the pair's trajectory, the pathway of evolution in this case, reflects the outcome of the struggle. So if the dog, say, is more muscular than the master, so the dog will take the master to one direction, and vice versa. Now imagine the same dog walker struggling with multiple dogs. The same, this is important, the same dog walker. We are not changing the dog walker, struggling with multiple dog on leashes of varied length, with each dog tugging in different direction. All these tugs represent the influence of developmental factors, including epigenetics, antibodies, hormones passed by the parents, as well as ecological legacies, culture, and the culture they bequeath. Now, did you understand? Obviously, you have to understand that the poor chap, the dog walker, was anyways, struggling with one particular dog, is now holding on to a variety of dogs. Obviously, the analogy that we're trying to make is the very crux of this passage, that genes, when dealt with these ideas, epigenetics, antibodies, hormones passed on by the parents, ecological factors, cultural factors, then the genes cannot do the work, or maybe the pathway of the evolution, or the trajectory, the pair of trajectory will change. I hope you understand that. Okay, so at that point, it will not be as easy that what we were taught in our schools, that inheritance of acquired characteristics is impossible. Maybe it is possible. We are just we're just trying to understand that thing from the author's perspective. Let's read ahead. The received wisdom is that parental experiences can't affect the characters of their offspring. Offspring matlab bacche, except that they do. This is also an important idea. The way that genes are expressed to produce an organism's phenotype, the actual characteristics it ends up with, is affected by chemicals that attach to them. Everything from diet to air pollution to parental behavior can influence the addition or removal of these chemical marks, which switches genes on or off. So the can you realize that diet, air pollution, parental behavior, these are very markers that can switch on and off the genes which are in turn responsible for the inheritance of acquired characteristics, which which we were taught in school days was impossible. Usually these are called epigenetic attachments. Now obviously epigenetic attachment is not something that you really need to understand, it's just a word for you. Epigenetic attachments are removed during production of sperm and egg cells, but it turns out that some escape the resetting process that are passed on to the next generation along with the genes. This is known as epigenetic inheritance. Not really important. If the test setter asks you what is epigenetic inheritance, I will leave teaching for cat or taking the cat in matlab, to be honest. And more studies are confirming it, that it really happens. Let us return to the almond fearing mice. The inheritance of epigenetic mark transmitted in the sperm is what led to the mice's offspring to acquire an inherited trait. I don't really think, again, I need to explain. Mota mota, you've understood what they're trying to tell you. Epigenetics is only part of the story. Through culture and society, humans and other animals inherit knowledge and skills acquired by their parents. All this complexity points to an evolutionary process in which genome, over hundreds to thousands of generations, epigenetic modification and inherited cultural factors over several, perhaps tens or hundred of a generation, and parental effects over single generation time span collectively inform how organisms adapt. We're talking about organism ka adaptation, that is, somewhere or the other related to this inherited cultural factors. These extra genetic kind of inheritance gives organism the flexibility to make rapid adjustment in the environmental challenges, dragging genetic changes in their wake, much like a rowdy pack of dogs. Interesting. Interesting. Although the last part, to be very honest, I don't think the last part made a lot of sense to me. But again, I am pretty sure that all of you who have, so I'm just taking a screenshot just in case I need to refer back to this one. If you guys want, you can possibly take a screenshot at this point in time. If I have to come back to the passage, I'll probably use the screenshot. But then, because this is a demonstrative video, I know for a fact that I don't want to come back to this passage again and again, for a simple reason. I believe that most of your comprehension would have been easy. For this was an easy article to read. The first question, the passage uses the metaphor of a dog walker to argue the evolutionary adaptation is most comprehend argue that evolutionary adaptation is most comprehensively understood as being determined by. This is a common question type in which your ideas that are presented in the article are presented to you in the option such that they are separated by commas, and you will see the logical link there. The only way, this was a very very easy question, I could have said that this was actually a very easy question, and most of the student got this correct, is just by the idea that in the how do I put this, in the passage itself it is written dog walkers are compared to genes metaphorically. And if you realize genetic, epigenetic, developmental factor, and ecological legacies, none of them start with a gene, this thing. There is something called as an extra genetic, but that obviously is not my case. So goes out, goes out, goes out. This has to be my answer. A very, very, very easy this thing. But just for your sake, I would go back to the passage and hopefully I will get what I am looking at here. So here you can see the dog walker, the gene ideology is given here. Okay. Let's go to the next one. The next question is, which one of the following option best describes the author's argument? Do we understand the author argument? Let's read the options. Darwin's theory of natural selection cannot fully explain evolution. That this is obviously, I mean, one of the cases that has been talked in the this thing, because we, and if you really want to go back to the passage, I'll take you back to the passage as well. It said that around the 40s and 60s, which married Charles Darwin's mechanism of natural selection with Gregor Mendel's discovery of how genes inherited. But with this much, all I can say is that Darwin's theory of natural selection cannot fully explain evolution. Obviously, it's written. Mendel's theory of inheritance is unfairly underestimated in explaining evolution. Fair, unfair, where are we discussing fair, unfair? Goes out. Darwin and Mendel's theory together best explains the evolution. If this were true, what was the need for that Wilson fellow to come into the picture? Goes out. Easy question type, easy answer. But there were some students who would have, faced this one a bit. I mean, you could have been enticed as to select this one. Wilson's theory of evolution is scientifically superior to either Darwin or Mendel's. But please understand, this would have been a correct answer if there were a comparative study given in the passage. Were there any comparative study given in the passage? Superior, inferior, this thing? It wasn't the case, right? So you can effectively eliminate option D also, making A to be my more appropriate answer. And just for your sake of clarity, I would like to show you the answers. The first one is option A, which we took, and this one is also option A. Now obviously you can see the website. You can go to the website and see the explanation that they have presented. I think our explanation, or the way how we are explaining these things, are better. Let's go to the last two questions. The Emory University experiment with mice points to the inheritance of. Now please understand, if you were not able to get this correct, then what is the point? So acquired characteristic is, the answer. Obviously it is, shouting in your face, pick me, pick me, pick me. So I call these types pick me types, right? Obviously there is nothing psychological in nature about the passage. Nothing of that sort has been discussed in the passage, so psychological markers goes out of the picture. Personality trait, definitely not. Nothing of that sort. What personality trait of mice were, presented? Nothing of that sort presented in the passage. Again, a very interesting thing, some of the student would have considered this one, acquired parental fears. But please understand, we're talking about Emory University experiment. This cannot be a trivial fear. Just the, when we say that this points to the inheritance of acquired parental fears, a university experiment. Obviously the experiment they did with the mice, mouse, rats, whatever you want to call them, but that cannot be just to point out the inheritance of parental fear. It is a little more than that. And best of the best student will eliminate the psychological marker, personality trait, but then, will falter at this one. So I am just reiterating myself that this is just a part of the experiment. This is not the outcome of the experiment. So this has to be the answer. You can go and see the explanation what these fellows have given. I think my explanation is better. The last question, which one of the following, if true, would negate the main message of the passage? Okay, so first of all, if true would negate, this is a question type I have already detailed. If true, strengthen. This is something that I have already discussed in one of my critical reasoning videos. So the primer to critical reasoning, I think you guys don't have that video, but I'll try to publish that sometime soon, or maybe I'll do it with you all in person. So if found true would negate, we'll have to find all the answers that if true would strengthen the passage and eliminate those options. Let's read the first one. A study of indicating primacy of ecological impact on human adaptation. Ecological impact on human adaptation. If this were true, would negate the main message of the passage. If this were true, that primacy of ecological impact on human adaptations, actually, I would have eliminated this on the face of it. Okay, by the very face value, the primacy of this ecological impact has got nothing to do with the main message of the passage, goes out. Obviously you have to be careful. You have to constantly ask yourself, if this were true, would it strengthen the idea or weaken the idea? So in a way, if you see, the last line already mentions these things. Okay, so this is where the last line ka ambiguity comes into the picture, that where do these extra genetic kind of inheritance give flexibility to adjustment of environmental, dragging genetic change in their wake. much like a rowdy pack of dog. So actually, if you realize that this last line is actually pointing you towards this part, right? Right. That the primacy of the ecological impact, the primacy of ecological impact or human adaptation. This, if this were true also, this will not negate. This will, in a in other words, this will doesn't do anything. So I don't even think that it can weaken or strengthen. So yeah, I mean, I am wasting too much time on this one, digressing too much. A study highlighting the criticality of epigenetic inheritance on evolution. Now, if this were true, this will definitely strengthen the passage or strengthen the main idea, goes out. A study affirming the sole influence of natural selection and inheritance on evolution. This is exactly what this Mendel and the Darwin fellow were saying. And the entire passage, the entire study, or the, the RC, the comprehension passage, basically pointed towards how this is not the only thing that is solely responsible for the influence of natural selection and inheritance on evolution. If this were true, this would this would actually negate or weaken the main idea of the passage. So this is the true, this is the answer. But let's read the last option any which ways. A study affirming the influence of socio-cultural markers on evolutionary process, definitely something. I mean, if this were true, would strengthen the passage, strengthen the main idea of the passage. So definitely this will also get eliminated. So just eliminating the options. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how to put this out, but again, I don't think that even this one was also very difficult. So I would call this passage a moderate one. Not, let's not even rate them. Okay, so just a moderate, just a moderate. Yeah. So yeah, thank you. With that being said, this is it. Now I'll take questions if I have.